dogma lesson just not bothering to plan? That's a question for TEFLologists. When I read this book, is it better to skim or scan? That's a question for TEFLologists. Can you be a good teacher if you have a CELTA? Or should you invest in an MA or a Delta? From politics to methodology, we'll discuss them all on TEFLology.
Hello, I'm Matthew.
I'm Rob.
And I'm Matt.
And welcome back to TEFLology, a podcast about teaching English as a foreign language and related matters, presented by three self-certified TEFLologists.
TEFL Pioneers.
This week's TEFL pioneer is a man called Wilhelm Vitor, I believe it's pronounced. Have either of you heard of him?
I don't know, because I don't know how the name's pronounced.
I've heard of the Wilhelm scream.
It's not, I don't think it's the same Wilhelm.
Different.
Yeah, probably.
Was that his contribution?
Yes.
He did a scream.
Right, which has become famous among TEFLologists,
Yes.
amongst others.
Really?
I don't think it's that Wilhelm or Wilhelm. This is a German fellow,
Right.
born 1850. The exact date of his birth is given as Christmas.
Okay.
So I'm not sure what that means.
Oh, that's really sad. He must have got just one set of presents.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Oh.
His father was a Protestant minister, as every person born in the 19th century seems to have had a Protestant minister as a father. So basically, he was a language teacher originally in Realschulen, which is basically the type of German secondary school, and taught English as far as I can tell. He was it says language teacher, but as far as I can tell, he taught English. He was interested in a lot of things. His father wanted him to study theology, maybe follow him into the Protestant ministerism of Ministry, there we go. But he was much more interested in education and language, and especially phonetics. He went to England for a couple of years in the early 1870s to teach German. He went back in 1882 for a couple of years and taught German at University College, Liverpool.
Right.
It was at this time, when he was in Liverpool, during a short touring holiday in Wales, apparently, that he wrote the thing that he became maybe most famous for, which in German is called, I'm going to try this in German.
Okay.
Der Sprachunterricht muss umkehren.
That's pretty
Why
scary.
Why are you shouting?
Because there is actually, the title does actually have an exclamation mark at the end.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, he included an exclamation mark at the end.
It always sounds like people are shouting.
Right, I would have read that without the exclamation mark. I would have read that way.
Okay.
So der Sprachunterricht is language instruction, basically.
Right.
Muss umkehren, must... I think there's different ways of translating the umkehren, but basically it must be revolutionized, must be turned around, must be made new.
Right.
So this was kind of a polemic, really railing against the method of language teaching which was popular at the time, which was grammar translation.
Right.
Which, according to the research that I did into Viëtor, grammar translation actually originated in Germany at the end of the 18th century.
Ah, interesting.
And one of the reasons it became so popular then was maybe because of the education system in Germany at the time. I mentioned that he worked at Realschulen, which is one type of secondary school, but in Germany they have they have a bunch of different types of high schools,
right.
And the other is the Gymnasium, which is a very kind of high academic secondary school.
Right.
And it became very popular in these gymnasiums. And it became popular because they could basically make students memorize a bunch of stuff. The teacher didn't have to do much, just test them occasionally, just give them the stuff to memorize.
Yeah.
Viëtor, his main point is that it didn't work. Well, not only did it not work, that it was unfair to students.
Right.
So the subtitle of Der Sprachunterricht muss umkehren was Ein Beitrag zur Überbildungsfrage. Which means on the question of overworking pupils.
Ah, interesting.
So that was part of his point, was not only what was, well, I guess including basically the whole pedagogy behind making students do this, that it's not fair to students, you're just making them work unnecessarily. And maybe that's a key point, is that it was an ineffective method.
Right. What inspired him to write this? And how did he present it? Was he kind of like Martin Luther nailing it to the door of the school?
Quite the opposite.
Oh, really?
He wrote it under a pseudonym.
Oh, okay.
The pseudonym being Quosque Tandem.
That's a stupid name.
Yeah, which is Latin, as you can guess, and it's from something from Cicero.
Right.
And it translates loosely into, the colloquial version is, so how long are we going to do this for, basically?
Okay.
Was his work quite controversial at the time?
I think it was quite controversial. So this pamphlet, I'm not going to say it again. I don't know the short version. Basically, apparently it read some of the research I read said that it's the kind of thing that it'd be very hard to get published nowadays anywhere.
Right.
It was academic, but it was also kind of a rallying cry. It's a very kind of emotional piece of writing.
Yeah.
Basically, because not only was grammar translation popular at the time, but a very kind of extreme version of grammar translation.
Right.
Basically, there was no speaking at all in the lesson. Students, all they did was memorize grammar rules and then have isolated sentences that they translated, and they just did that over and over and over again.
Interesting.
So he was part of, this is kind of the kicking off of what they call the reform movement in language teaching, which originated in Germany but wasn't confined to Germany. And what's interesting about the reform movement is that it was one of the first kind of bits of language revolution that originated, or maybe the last, that originated in secondary education, which didn't come from academics, it didn't come from university teachers, it came from people who were just, real language teaching every day in the classroom.
Yeah.
What the reform movement, the reform movement, as you can imagine, was very much against grammar translation.
Yeah.
It emphasized the spoken language. It had this idea that language should always be presented at the level of discourse, so you don't just have isolated sentences. It's always in real communication.
Would you say the reform movement was kind of a precursor to the communicative revolution?
Possibly, yeah. People connect it to the direct method.
Yeah.
What it seems like, I don't know a lot about the reform movement. What it seems like, it's kind of a midway point between grammar translation and the direct method, just in terms of the way that a class would be conducted. So there was still a lot of, France, what's the answer to this?
Yeah.
Heinrich, what's the answer to this? Those kind of things, but based on an authentic or semi-authentic piece of text, which the students would have looked at and kind of gotten a good understanding of.
Right.
The grammar came later, kind of, and he was a contemporary of our old pal Henry Sweet.
Yeah.
And along with Sweet is kind of considered one of the forefather or grandfathers, maybe that's not the right term, but one of the founding people of phonetics.
Yeah. Who were the other two fathers?
Mothers.
I've done that joke before.
Mothers, you mean?
Mothers.
Oh.
What?
Two
No,
grandfathers, two. Oh, right.
The forefathers.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like a joke.
It's like a joke. Yeah.
Similar to.
Let's see. And let's see, other things. So his system was, which I don't understand that well, but it is basically centered around a piece of text, which the teacher and the students would look at very carefully.
Right.
A lot of concept questions about it. He was also obviously very much into pronunciation. He wrote some of the early books on German pronunciation. He wrote a 2-volume book on Shakespearean pronunciation.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He was really into Shakespeare as well. The only homework, he wanted no homework except for memorizing little poems as party pieces.
Okay.
He said it would be nice for the mothers of the students if their kids could go and recite little poems to them in a foreign language.
That's good. I remember I learned a French song. It's the only bit of French I knew for a really long time. After years of school, that was the only bit that I knew, but I took advantage and tried to say it as much as possible.
Do you know it now?
No. I can't remember what it was.
I like that idea of having some sort of repertoire like a grab bag of things you can just do. Like, I know this phrase. I know this song. And,
yeah. It's like memorizing a poem or something, and then trying to impress girls by.
Not that much use communicatively, of course.
Yeah.
You can't go into a shop and say, "Hi," and launch into a ballad.
I said the term just before the test. Time is money in Japanese today, and she's like, "Oh yeah, okay, we got that." And
right.
it just kind of fitted the situation and worked quite nicely.
Right.
When I was a German exchange student in Bonn, I used to go in shops.
You were never a German student.
I was at one point.
Okay.
English is my second language. I'd go into shops and ask for ein Stück Schwarzwälder Kirschtorte bitte, which means a piece of Black Forest gâteau.
All right, nice.
Yeah, in any shop. That's what I'd ask for. It's the only thing I could. Anyway. Let's see. Maybe also, I guess the connection to the direct method was that the target language was the medium of instruction also. In 1884, he took a chair at the University of Marburg, where he stayed for a long time. This is where he did a lot of his work. He wrote a review of the first textbook for teaching English as a foreign language to Germans by a guy called Henry Offelin. In 1899, this one I thought was really interesting. He ran they called it a summer school, where he had some of his other fellow Reform Movement people teaching foreign languages to other language teachers.
Right.
And so they experienced these methods by being students.
It's kind of like the first bit of the CELTA when you have to be a student and then
yeah. And so I think to me this seems like one of the very early, if not maybe not the first, but an early kind of teacher training, and a very kind of interesting method of teacher training.
Yeah. That sounds interesting.
Yeah.
A very influential bloke.
Yeah. So he died when he was 67 in Marburg, just before the end of the Second World War, after prolonged illness, apparently, and grief over his son who died in the war.
Oh.
Sorry to end on a downer. I mean, biography is always going to end on a downer, I guess.
I'm sure he had a nice poem
Read
about it.
Memorized in a foreign language.
Yeah.
So that's Wilhelm Vitor, this week's TEFL Pioneer.
TEFL Cultures. Today's TEFL culture is Yakudoku. Now it's interesting, the first section that we talked about was about grammar translation, well, about one of the people who moved us away from grammar translation. So today I'm going to be talking about a Japanese form of grammar translation, which, as I said, is called Yakudoku. Have you heard of this methodology?
I have, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So literally translated, yaku means translation, doku means reading. So it means translation reading, very roughly.
Yeah.
It's a technique where you have a target language sentence. So, for example, if you're a Japanese learner, you would have an English sentence. You translate that sentence into Japanese word by word, and then you reorganize the parts of the sentence to make a syntactically correct Japanese sentence.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sounds like a winner. How can that go wrong?
Well, so when they do the reorganizing, they have little symbols which are used to tell you the word order. So this was originally used for teaching or for learning to read Chinese, which obviously uses pictographs, ideographs, whatever. Yeah. And there, it's not quite as clear in English as to the word order, so they used these little symbols which showed you have to move this word back, move this word forward, or you have to move this word up. One of them was jo, which means up, so I don't know how they used that exactly.
Okay.
So this is a very kind of an ancient methodology. It dates back more than 1,000 years. It was originally used when the Japanese began to read Chinese. So for people who don't know, the Japanese writing system is there are three different forms of it. There are two syllabaries, and then there's the Chinese characters, which were imported from China. So at this time, there were only the two syllabaries. And Chinese was the first major foreign language being studied in Japan, so this was the first language teaching and language learning methodology that they imported. So 1,000 years ago, they used it to learn Chinese. It was still being used in the 19th century when they started learning Western languages. So they learned Dutch. They started producing textbooks for studying Dutch using Yakudoku. The earliest record that I could find of it being used for teaching English is a textbook called Eibe Taiwa Shoke, which translates to a shortcut to English conversation. Apparently, yes, published in 1859.
Wow.
It's interesting because this was a conversation textbook using this weird Yakudoku system. when they started using Yakudoku to teach English, instead of these organizational symbols, they added numerals. So they had the numeral for 1, the numeral for 2, the numeral for 3, and so on, which showed you in what order you should put the words when you reorganize the sentence. So where you put 1, that was the first word of the sentence, 2 was the second word, and so on. Yeah. So that's the background to Yakudoku. What do you think of the sound of that as a methodology?
It sounds very tiring and labouring, and it's obviously not very communicative. But I think going back 1,000 years, it probably did have its benefits. When probably people were writing more, there wasn't as much international communication, and probably people were trying to decipher other cultures. Because Japan used to be a self-imposed what's the word?
It's in Japanese, it's
isolation.
sakoku.
Sakoku, yeah. So they were probably trying to use this as a way to kind of connect with the outside world, and this was probably the best way they knew. I guess.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of sounds like the language learning method a child would come up with.
Right.
Like if you have a sentence, okay, well, we just figure out what that word is in my language, what that word is, and then...
It's very racist of you.
But I mean, you can kind of see how it came about in terms of learning to read Chinese.
Yeah.
Where I don't know a lot about Chinese, but perhaps each character, represents a concept, and then I'm not sure how the kind of grammar words, those kind of things work in Chinese.
Yeah.
But it seems like maybe you could just identify the meaning of each of those characters and then figure out the relationship.
Yeah. Well, I think generally speaking, it's more useful for learning Chinese. That seems to be the consensus view from what I've read.
Okay.
And it's not quite so good for languages which have a different kind of writing system.
Yeah.
So there are two different kinds of criticism that have been aimed at Yakudoku. The first one is pedagogical, and the second one is political.
Okay.
So in terms of pedagogy, one of the main criticisms is that it prevents students from being able to read texts directly in a foreign language. You can't just sit down and read the text if you've learned through a Yakudoku method. The way that you do it is you have to translate all the sentences first in your head and reorganize them. So you don't learn the language, you don't learn to read it directly.
Yeah.
And also, what comes out of a Yakudoku translation is a literal translation. It's literally the words translated word by word and then reorganized.
Like a Google Translate.
Exactly, yeah. So any linguistic or cultural difference, any nuance is lost completely in the translation. Any idiomatic understanding is lost as well. Yeah.
I mean, and this knowledge doesn't seem to be applied anywhere. Like it's translated, but for what purpose?
Well, that's the next.
I mean, one thing I wonder about though is this idea of word for word. I wonder if I imagine it could reach a slightly more advanced point where it's like, phrase for phrase, or
Right. Yeah, there's actually I've got an example here. So this is the 3-stage process. So stage 1, you've got a target sentence, which is she has a nice table in her room. So you translate it as she, kanojo, has, motteru. A nice is connected together. So that's hitotsu no sutekina. Hitotsu no sutekina. And then table, teburu, in naka, her.
Wow.
And then her room is at the end. So kanojo no heya.
Yeah.
So you do have these clumps together where you can't separate them in Japanese syntax. So, or if you're saying this sentence. So I think that would apply.
Yeah.
You just sort of
and from what little I know of Japanese, that's not going to make a very natural Japanese sentence.
No.
Even rearranging it.
Yeah.
Do you think in Yakudoku's heyday,
you really wanted to say that phrase, didn't you?
It's a great name for a band.
First album.
Do you think in their heyday they focused much on form, or do you think it was whole text? Or do you think it was more about the skill of translating?
I think it
was.
was.
Do you think they picked out particular forms that they wanted to focus?
I think it was mainly about deciphering foreign records, like tax records and things like that, messages from foreign kingdoms and that kind of thing. When we're talking about very early uses of it, so like the early contact with the Chinese Empire or the Chinese Kingdom? I'm not sure. But this actually brings us on to the next section of the criticism, which is political criticisms. So some scholars that I've been reading have argued that as a pedagogy, it was designed to cripple the students' powers of self-expression. So it produces a language population that can take information from foreign cultures without having to give away any information about Japanese culture.
Okay. Right.
And the reason that the reason that people have said this might have been done is it's tied to ideas of efforts to westernize Japan in the 19th century. So when they were trying to westernize the country, trying to catch up with the economic might of some other nations, they wanted to get a lot of information from these countries, but they didn't want to share information about themselves. This was following, as Matt, you just said about Sakoku, when they were closed off for 300 years. And it also tied into the imperial ambitions of the country. How convincing do you find that? Because I don't find it that convincing.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I mean, like we talked about in the first part, grammar translation was also extremely popular in the late 19th century in Germany, and I'm sure most parts of Europe. It seems, I mean, this grammar translation or Yakudoku, it kind of seems like an obvious thing for schools to do, where, what you do is you get students just to sit there and translate stuff, basically. So I'm not 100% convinced.
Yeah. Well, perhaps I'll just finish by talking about why it's still popular, because it is still the major methodology in Japanese schools. There have been efforts to bring in more communicative reform, but it still dominates quite a lot in Japanese secondary schools and in the cram schools, which are a very big kind of shadow education industry.
It's still a social practice.
Yeah.
So I think that's another point of it. It's not very sociable, but it is a thing that people feel they need to do. Or
Yes, yeah. Well, it's traditional.
Feels like you're doing some work.
Yeah,
yeah.
That's kind of the problem with. That's one of the problems in Japan, I guess.
Right.
About learning English. I mean, not just.
It's traditional, which is one reason that it's still going on. It's traditional.
Right.
Another point is that it's very easy for teachers. Yeah. They don't have to be communicatively fluent in order to teach the language. And finally, and perhaps this is the most important reason, it's necessary for passing university entrance exams, because the entrance exams are still focused a lot on translation and on being able to extract information. So you need to be able to do it in order to pass the exams, which is probably why they focus so much on it in secondary schools, and especially in cram schools, which almost 70% of Japanese students, I think, attend at some point in their schooling life. So, yeah, I think it's perhaps not ideal, but it's here to stay for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder. I think there have been huge attempts to deal with it and introduce more communicative language teaching in Japan. And I think my feeling is that those changes are happening.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
Yeah, I think they're happening, but maybe it'll take a while, or maybe they'll coexist.
Sure.
Yes. Yeah. So that's today's TEFL culture, Yakudoku. TEFL news.
Okay, so we've talked about, we've been quite global, I'd say, this episode. We've talked about Germany, and we've talked about Japan.
Yeah.
And and I guess the other theme is dissatisfaction. Obviously, we talked about the problems with Yakudoku, and we talked about
the reform.
His name.
Viëtor's, yes.
And we talked about the reforms there. And that brings us on to our next topic, today's TEFL news section, about the kind of the dissatisfaction with foreign languages in Britain amongst young people.
Right.
Learning foreign languages.
Learning foreign languages, yeah. Maybe not teaching, I'm not too sure about teaching, but certainly learning foreign languages. And this comes from a Guardian news article from a couple of months ago, so it's still fairly relevant.
Okay.
And they asked the question, do young people care about learning foreign languages?
Right.
What do you think the answer might be to that?
I was speaking to my family earlier this week, and I was talking about how I feel I don't have any talent for learning foreign languages. And my mum said, the thing is, you just never really cared about learning foreign languages. You never wanted to learn them, which I think that is quite fairly representative of at least my friendship group.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of asking young English people how they feel about it, I'd say they're not that interested.
Yeah.
That's my guess.
I think you'd be right, yeah, hence the news story. So this research was conducted by The Guardian. It was kind of a joint research project between The Guardian and the British Academy.
Right.
And they polled 1,001, very exact, 1,001 young people between the ages of 14 and 24.
Right.
24 still young, isn't it?
Yeah,
fairly young.
Is it young? Okay, yeah. Yeah. In the UK, so they took a cross section and they wanted to kind of explore a few different questions into do people actually care about foreign languages or not?
Right.
Okay, so the first question they asked were, what are the three main benefits to learning a language? Three main benefits. Okay, I won't give you the results, but better job prospects abroad. I won't give you the results yet.
Okay.
Better job prospects abroad, talking to other people, learning about another culture, learning a practical skill, incentive to travel, a sense of achievement, better job prospects in the UK, a higher salary in my career, and then there are no benefits or other.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you think might be the highest response?
I mean, I'd have guessed either job prospects or no. That's it. That's
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Something to do with job prospects.
Yeah, so 43% of the 1,001 students, very exact, said better
So
job.
430.
Yeah.
One.
That's
Said,
a third of a person.
they say, better job prospects.
Right.
So they found that to be the most important factor when choosing to study a foreign language.
Right.
And they felt a higher salary didn't have any impact, which is interesting because in Japan, learning a language is often related to a higher salary, and that is a lot of people's incentives in Japan to get a promotion, to get a higher salary.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting that it's the opposite in the UK. Amongst young people, not amongst working people, perhaps.
But we don't know. We don't have any information on the working people.
Right.
I wonder if a lot of those people said job prospects. I wonder if they actually believe that, though, or if they actually care about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, that's what they're citing as their main motivation. And they also talk about downsides to learning a language as well. Learning grammar is difficult. Learning vocabulary is hard. And these were the two main points why people are put off learning a foreign language. And I'd agree with that too. In my case, especially with grammar. Obviously, for me, I like vocab.
Yeah.
What about the vocab?
Okay.
I like the grammar. Don't like the vocab. Let's join forces.
different strokes. Yeah. Some people, even 17%, suggested there are no downsides to learning a foreign language, which kind of reflects quite positive attitudes to.
Yeah. Is this downsides to learning a foreign language?
Or to having learned a foreign language.
I think they mean in general the process of going through learning a language, actually having it in schools and colleges, and perhaps universities at this age too.
Right.
Yeah.
They think there's no downside, which is quite positive.
Yeah.
Yes.
How many said that?
17%.
That's 170 and a bit of a bloke.
Yeah.
What's interesting as well is 11% of people cite that it's not academically rigorous enough learning a foreign language, which I find quite interesting.
We should tell them about some Yakudoku.
And again, that kind of flies in the face of what's happening in not Germany, or maybe Germany, but Japan certainly, where it's considered as a very academic subject, learning a language. Not so much as a communicative one, perhaps, but people go to university to study English.
Yeah.
And it's considered more as an academic process, I guess.
Right.
They also asked students which of the following participants, which of the following reasons describe why you chose not to study a foreign language at GCSE level. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar, GCSE is the standard qualification.
Secondary education.
Secondary education. Students take when
General
they're
certificate of secondary education.
students take when they're 16-year-olds and they're going into college.
They're not required to take a foreign language GCSE?
Really?
No, I'm
They're
asking.
not required.
They're not.
No.
All right.
It was.
I'm
no,
sure
it's
in my
not.
day they were.
Yeah, I think I was. I had to take French. Yeah.
It was compulsory up till about 10 years ago.
Okay.
I think, and then they took it off, and it's optional in most parts. Certainly in my hometown, my county.
Yeah, but that's Portsmouth, isn't it?
Yeah, I had to study Latin as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
When I was in secondary school.
Showing your age.
That's the South, isn't it?
Not far from Portsmouth.
Yeah.
So they cited again that other subjects are more interesting, 32%. Languages are difficult, 30%.
Yeah.
And I don't feel confident speaking, 27%. Which is quite high. So yeah, did you both? So you studied Latin, Rob?
I studied Latin. Well, not studied Latin. I wouldn't say Latin as a foreign language, though.
No.
I studied Latin, but the rules of Latin.
Archaic.
Latin plus French and German.
Yeah, and obviously you got to quite a high level of German shouting.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know the exclamation mark.
Some other results they found from this study is the lack of confidence amongst young people amongst British young people, and they were asked to describe their ability, their language ability, what they felt, and they polled French learners, German learners, Spanish learners, Italian, Russian, Mandarin, and Japanese learners.
Yeah.
Actually. And the results that they got were, I would have difficulty understanding anything.
That would have been me.
The highest result there was 48%. 48% said they wouldn't understand a thing. I can't understand basic phrases. 47% in French said that. I can't communicate in most situations. This was the lowest, sorry, not the lowest of the findings, but very low. I think the highest was 16%.
Yeah.
And it went all the way down, and only 1% suggested that they were completely fluent.
Right.
Okay.
In French, in Spanish, and 7% in Mandarin suggested they were completely fluent.
Huh.
And this probably suggests that maybe the small group of participants probably speak at home.
Right.
Probably speaking the language at home.
Yeah. I mean, my feeling is that other Western European countries, mainland Western European countries, people are maybe a bit more comfortable speaking foreign languages, maybe just from the proximity.
Yeah, well, I think also if you grow up in the UK, you don't really have to speak foreign languages. I mean, you speak already the most prominent global language.
Yeah.
And I think most people feel it's not necessary. And they don't speak it at most points of their life. So why would they have any confidence or ability in it, really?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, that's how I felt, certainly.
They cite some of the recent education reforms for the problems or the lack of interest in languages, and the Youth Voices research group found that the numbers of students taking foreign languages is down by almost a fifth since 2008.
Right.
And acceptances for language degrees last year is the lowest in a decade, last year being 2013.
Is that because people aren't applying or because the standards have just got really high?
Well, they cite that GCSE entries have begun to rise. So there's more people taking GCSEs.
Right.
But I think, as we've seen, I just think the interest is perhaps not there anymore. Perhaps I think a lot of the people in this study cite that they speak English and they can go anywhere in the world learning English, and that's kind of the problem.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's that surprising that people aren't, into studying something which they don't necessarily see the use of.
Yeah.
I mean, linguistics as a field is, for those who are interested in it, it's interesting.
Yeah.
But for everybody else, it's just not.
Yeah. I think the other thing is, or perhaps another aspect of it, is that foreign language education in the UK just isn't very good. And to be honest, I think that a language GCSE isn't that difficult to get. I'll make an admission here. I've got a C. A GCSE C grade in French. The only reason I've got that is because, when I did the spoken interview with the teacher, she pointed at the phrases on a chart on the wall for me to speak, and she didn't check our pockets when we went. We had to do a recording of a spoken speech that we'd memorised into a tape recorder. She didn't check our pockets, so everyone just went out with the speech in their pockets and read it off the paper.
Sure.
And that's how I got a C. That's my ill-gotten GCSE.
Well,
what is the statute of limitations on GCSE?
I don't know.
I mean, it seems to me that obviously these days there's a lot of in certain parts of the UK there are obviously a lot of Polish speakers, and it seems to me that it would make more sense to learn that language.
Yeah.
That's what's around you. That's what possibly you can hear in the street. So why not learn that in the class and apply that? And even if people aren't going to continue the rest of their lives speaking Polish, they will have some is that apathy? Empathy. Not apathy.
They'll have apathy for everything else.
They do have
Some will have apathy, but others will have empathy towards learning a foreign language. We know of the benefits of speaking two languages.
Yeah.
Right. I think we've talked about it in other episodes, the benefits. But I think those benefits are maybe long term and hard to see. I think in Southern California, where there's a large percentage of people are Spanish speakers, maybe it's their first language.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the native English speakers still find it hard to motivate themselves to learn Spanish, even though it's all around them on posters and everything.
Yeah.
I think it just comes back to that case of whether there's a need for it or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's a shame, really. I mean, British people do have a reputation of being particularly bad at languages, and I wish that I'd put the effort in. It's one of my many regrets, like learning the piano as well. I wish I'd put the effort in.
You regret learning the piano?
I regret not studying.
Oh, right.
I think if British people did study languages more,
why?
Because I think it would improve, relations with other countries. I think it would improve the image of British people abroad.
So one argument to improve this is the idea, and this was in another article as well, which perhaps we won't have time to talk about today, is how to combine communities together.
Right.
And some people argue that you can't combine communities by getting everyone to speak in English, but you should maybe get local people to learn some words from other community of users of other languages.
Right. Yeah.
Kind of in a lingua franca kind of way, perhaps.
Yeah.
That seems, I think that's a nice idea. It seems somewhat idealistic to hope that people would do that.
Right. Yeah. Like everything else in language teaching.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so that's today's TEFL news.
Thank you for listening to this episode of TEFLology. If you'd like to get in contact with us, please send an email to teflology@gmail.com, or you can follow us on Twitter @TEFLology.
So it's goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.
Goodbye.